On this episode of Ask an Artist, I'm joined by Hasraf Dulull, otherwise known as Haz. Haz is a filmmaker, producer, and VFX artist on films like The Beyond and 2036 Origins Unknown. In this episode, we'll discuss what it means to be a filmmaker in 2021 and the implications of some new technologies emerging within the industry. As usual, you can find links to everything discussed in this episode in the show notes below or at actionvfx.com/podcast. Let's jump right in. Hey everybody, Luke Thompson from ActionVFX, and today we have a very exciting episode of Ask an Artist. I'm here with Hasraf Dulull, also known as Haz, and Haz has really been a big pioneer of virtual production as of the past couple years, really pushing the boundaries of Unreal Engine, and honestly, we're just gonna nerd out about some really techie stuff today, so I'm extremely excited because that's obviously something that's really close to my heart. So, welcome, Haz. Super excited to have you.
Thanks, Luke. I'm so excited to be here, and also I'm actually honored to be here as well because I made a massive following of you guys. So yeah.
Hey, awesome. Thanks so much. And yeah, I'm really excited for this episode. So let's just jump right in. Okay, so for those of you kind of just tuning in to this show, it is really question centric. So each guest that we have on has one specific question, and we'll kind of unpack some different questions and discussions based around that one thing. So for Haz, having a big background as far as like pioneering technology and storytelling and kind of how those two worlds meld, Haz's question is going to be, how do you balance between tech and story? So looking, kind of pulling out of that is going to be, do you kind of experiment with new technologies, you develop things and then see, hey, there can be a story built around this? Does it kind of work the inverse way? How does your process usually work when it comes to that?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question there, Luke. I mean, it varies on projects. Like, I can tell you my first feature film, The Beyond, was a fake documentary, based on my short film project, Chronos. And so you can imagine the technology around that was, getting GoPros, getting small Blackmagic pocket cameras, and all of the visual effects having to feel natural and organic and docu feeling. I remember one point we were rendering amazing CG sequences and cutting it with documentary footage, and it just didn't work. So we had to rethink the way we did our compositing, rethink the way we comp our CG onto live action, put a lot of handheld in it. And one of the things we end up doing is coming up with solutions such as like playing back the super beautiful rendered CG back into camera to get all of the all of the chromatic aberration, all of the imperfections you get in camera, putting that in visual effects. And now you would never have thought of an idea or technique like this unless we were pushed into that storytelling style, which was, a very kind of like intimate storytelling of following a bunch of scientists. And then you flash forward to where we are today, where we're using Unreal Engine. And, and we're currently in production on a CG anime feature, the clue being a Akira poster in the back. And that's entirely, final pixel render out of Unreal Engine using an anime style shading that we've spent like over a year developing, working closely with the guys over at Epic on that as well. And again, like, we had a script. So the way my process works is always story is first. It's not the other way around. It's story's king. But on the flip side, it helps as you're writing the script or developing a project, knowing what technology is out there and how you could accomplish such bombastic ideas. The idea of the current project deals with multiverses, and it's very hyper-violent in true Japanime style. And, to do that live action would be a bit crazy. Probably wouldn't ever get made or released. And to do it in animation, and the thing about animation that, that I loved about animation, especially Japanimation, is that complex issues and complex themes translate so easily through animation, and it's accessible to anyone watching. I remember growing up watching Akira or Ghost in the Shell or Ninja Scroll, and I remember I was like 16 or 15, and I'm like, oh my god, what is this? This is amazing. I get it right away. So that influenced the storytelling, that influenced the type of scripts that we write. And, writing for live action is not the same as writing for animation. It's not the question of, like, take a live action script and just do an animation. It's, the way you design your shots, the pacing of your story, the way you show more and say less with animation. We do that with live action as well, but it's more so of animation. Like, the way you can move from one environment through the person's eye and pull out and you're in outer space. Now, it makes sense from an animation point of view. So that really helps. And the way we work is we write the first, sort of like the outline, we have an outlet called a treatment, and we cut like a sizzle trailer. We do some like mood boards, and we kind of pitch that around to financiers and potential actors to get on. And once we know there's a market out there, we know that, you know, distribution companies want to make a movie like, or want to release a movie like this, or go off and make it. We then start investing time in script, and while we're doing the script, we're investigating the technology. Like, okay, what can we do to make this movie while we're writing? Because we don't want to be in a position where we write this insane, like, Avatar style movie, and we're like,
and it just sits
how are we going to make this? Like, there's no freaking way we can make this, especially from an independent filmmaker's point of view, where you don't have millions and millions and millions of dollars. You know, you have a modest budget to play with, so you got to be very smart. So not just smart in how you make the movie, but also smart in how you write the film, so that you're writing something that will just get better in the filmmaking process, but also you're writing something that can be budgeted and scheduled accordingly.
Yeah, and I mean, when you mentioned kind of like utilizing Unreal Engine, but also coming at it, so a hint of virtual production with the like Japanese anime style, like that immediately piques my curiosity, because it's like all those limitations or caps that would normally be put on something as far as like locations or whatever are just kind of like alleviated and not there anymore. And so that's something that like I'm absolutely interested in watching, and just seeing, you know, even your type of storytelling narrative in some of your past films. Like I've really appreciated and enjoyed that, especially with Beyond. It's been a while since I've seen it. I think it was like once it was first released, but just having all of that, like the actual like NASA public domain footage in there, just totally elevated the entire thing and brought it to another level of like, this is actual footage that I've probably already seen somewhere else because it's public domain. But it just, I think small components like that really speak to like your storytelling style of truly being able to immerse, especially when that comes to like sci-fi. I think that's something that's really challenging and can be really difficult to accomplish, but small like little breadcrumbs like that just really continue to like build that world. So that's something that I've always thought was like super sick.
Thanks, man. I mean, it's
really excited about that film.
Thank you. It's well. I mean, you've said the words already, but it's world building. It really is. Science fiction's a genre. You know, I mean, I love action. I love rom-coms, thriller, but there's something about science fiction. You know, as a filmmaker that started his career working in video games and then working in visual effects, you know, world building's always been part of my DNA. You know, from even when I was in college, you know, making short films and stuff. So I find with sci-fi, there's a lot of license you can take to be like, you can break the rules a little bit. You know, you don't have to be in a location that needs to be perfectly exact to a certain period or time. And there's certain things like gravity. You can break the rules of gravity if you want to, the rules of physics, because we're in that future. And I think, you know, with live action, that's one thing. But then with animation, it's another thing, because with animation, you know, when we started playing with Unreal Engine, like, oh God, I started playing it a couple of years ago. But last year, I really kind of made it very public about the projects we were doing. And we did the first pilot for this animated series that was going around town in Hollywood. And it's called Battlestar, and we did that using Unreal Engine 422, I think it is. That's how old it was. And it was our first time, and it was very scary because the pro is that as a filmmaker, I don't have to rely on huge amounts of team. You know, as a director, I can go in, animate my own shots, block my own shots, experiment with ideas, and then once I'm happy with it, give it to the artist, and they'll make it a million times better than what I would do. But it's a really great collaborative process. But the con side of it is, digital humans at the time wasn't perfect, and no matter how well you tried to make it or how well you try to hide it or light in, there's that uncanny valley, and it's all in the eyes, as we know, right? And it doesn't help with, you know, movies like, you know, Rise of the Apes or Blur Studios doing amazing cinematics, that no matter what your budget is, the audience are evil out there. They can be. I mean, they're pretty brutal, right?
They are very brutal.
YouTube, man, I'll avoid that sometimes. But, you know, but at the same time, those feedback makes you think that you're making a movie for the audience. You're not making a movie just for yourself. Like, obviously, some filmmakers are very, you know, they make it about themselves. But for me, like, I make commercial movies. I want to be able to appeal to as much as I can. Obviously, I can't appeal to everyone because everyone's taste is different, right? And one of the constant feedback was like, oh man, Uncanny Valley took away from the story. And that goes back to your point about story and tech. And for me, you know, when we did Battlesuit, we felt that, oh my God, that story, the feedback we got in the story was great. They loved the idea of space exploration, about this AI, big giant robots. But the minute we cut to a digital human or a CG human, that uncanny valley just took the audience away, and that really kind of put me off a little bit. And then we end up doing another project called Mutant Year Zero, which was super fun to do. It's based on a really popular Swedish video game called Mutant Year Zero and the board games. And what was cool about that is you're dealing with a different level of anthropomorphism. You're dealing with, animals on human bodies. So you got this duck, you got this crazy duck, you got this crazy pig, you got this crazy, just crazy insane characters. And you get away with the uncanny valley because it's an animal on a human body, right?
Yeah.
But when it came to making our feature, and I really fell in love with Unreal, by summer last year, I'm like, I want to make a feature out of this. We're in pandemic mode. I don't see myself going on a film shoot right now, shooting anything. And I don't want to be stuck in another 2 years of development, which, it's standard, obviously. But I wanted to go out and make stuff, I'm kind of very hands-on. So I'm like, Unreal is the perfect tool for that, and let's just do that. And you know what the funny thing is, I originally dabbled with Unreal for one reason only, just to do previs. That's all I wanted to do, just do previs. I didn't want to, download and subscribe to Autodesk Motion Builder and stuff because of the budget we had, or use Autodesk 3D Max, which I'm very familiar with. So the fact that I was just using it for previs, but then the minute you start getting real-time reflection, shadows, particle effects as you're moving around in real time, and this is on a laptop, by the way. I'm like, this is insane. Why is anyone making movies this way? I can't be the only one, and I'm not the only one. There are tons of filmmakers that are doing that now. So that's when I started to realize, well, if we're going to make a movie, we got to be careful of the uncanny valley thing. And then, me and my producers were talking, and we're like, why don't we just look at the stuff that you love as a kid, but also the stuff that I keep referencing? I mean, look, if you see me in these meetings, the studios, I'm constantly referencing Akira, Ghost in the Shell. So why don't you just make an anime? I'm like, that's a good point. But the thing is that no one had done an anime out of Unreal Engine. If you look at Unreal Engine, it's deal with PBR, photo-based, realistic rendering. So you're kind of telling Unreal to do the things that it doesn't usually do, which is ignore photorealism, go stylize. So me and my CG supervisor, Andrea Tetecci, who's this amazing artist, Italian artist that I've worked with since way back in the short film days. And that's another thing I love about this whole industry, especially from an independent point of view. Visual effects industry itself are just full of filmmakers. Every artist is a filmmaker in one way or another, right? Whether you're doing a piece of roto, whether you're doing match moving and so on, you're part of the filmmaking process. And so I worked with Andrea since 2015 on my short films, and he's now my CG supervisor. He's now telling me, hey, don't do that, you're gonna break the renders. I'm like, yes sir. Nice. And he started looking into developing shaders and started, how do we create this flat look? We spent a lot of time watching anime, which is a great excuse to watch anime. And the thing we notice instantly, just like with CG and live action, is the reflections in the eyes. But anime do it so well. They have this big, giant, massive thing, and you make them wobble and little tears. You're like, oh my god, I'm emotionally gonna cry. Whereas imagine photoreal CG, the amount of work you will have to do just to get that is it's insane. So that's, again, having that background, having that R&D happen while we're writing the script or revising the script it's amazing. It's something that you don't get that opportunity to do every day as a filmmaker, because usually, on my second movie, Origin Unknown, the one with Katee Sackhoff that ended up being on Netflix, we got the script and it's go, 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 because that's when you get the actor, that's when you got the schedule, and that's when the location, I don't have time to experiment. No, just go off and do it. Whereas with this, you have time to experiment and try and find things out while you're developing the script, which I think is a game changer in filmmaking.
Yeah, that's definitely huge. And it's been really interesting to see even, and you mentioned just first getting into Unreal Engine for previs, looking back at even more than 5 years ago, there were companies exclusively doing previs, making really good money off of it, and they were doing it in Unreal. So I think that it's really interesting to kind of see how Epic has really just taken the reins when it came to seeing the potential of what that engine could be. And of course, within that past 5 years, they've just added more and more. And I think we are seeing the results of that investment from Epic early on into being able to build these out. And it's crazy because virtual production as a whole just changes how you approach things. It's you have a deck of cards and you're playing a game, but then it's oh, here's a completely new deck of cards. And then we can play all these other things with it instead of, these are just the tools in my tool belt. And these are the kind of boundaries or caps that I have on what I can create or what I can make. So I think just the more that goes on, especially Unreal Engine 5, as we kind of see development with all of that, it's been cool to see a lot more, I would consider non-techie filmmakers leaning into that. I think that's been such a really good segue Because for a while I'm just like, hey, use this stuff, it's awesome, like it'll help you tell your stories. But I think it's just been such a scary like black hole of like, well, I probably need to be a programmer, or like having some type of hesitation for that, which I totally get.
Well, that's interesting you say that, Luke. It's really interesting because like my background, as you know, I was a compositor. You know, I was not a 3D artist. You know, I mean, there's a reason why I didn't go 3D. And I, you know, when I left the video game industry, which was I was a generalist, right, doing game cinematics for like PlayStation 1 games, that kind of shows you how old that was, right? And when I made the move, I went to work at a company called MPC. You know, I started as a roto artist. But I remember going into MPC and they said, well, what do you want to do in visual effects? And I was like, I could do it all. I could do a bit of this, a bit of that. And they're like, well, yeah, you know, at a facility, you got to pick what you want to do. And I picked compositing because I love the idea of being the guy responsible for making or breaking a shot. Doesn't matter how amazing your CG is, but the comp isn't right.
Yeah.
The comp isn't right. Yeah. So it's all about those edges and stuff. So I stayed away from 3D, and you know I have to admit, you know, when things like Unity came out, you know, I was seeing what people like Neil Blomkamp was doing for Oak Studios, and you know, with the short Adam, and I'm like, oh my god, this looks amazing. Sick. But this is like so, yeah. But I was like, this is so technical. You have to be a 3D artist. I can't model anything, let alone deform a cube or something properly. So I remember when people tend to use Unreal, I was very hesitant, and but one of the things I do love about Unreal is how easy it is to quickly go to pick it up. You know, I mean, I may sound very like, you know, I'm a tech nerd, but trust me, I'm not that much of a tech nerd. I read a lot. But the thing is that, you know, I understand composite, I understand photography, I understand how things look and how they should look in lighting conditions and so on. But 3D is, you know, this whole different world. So I remember when doing battle suits in Mutant Year Zero, and my typical director notes would be like, can we move the tree 2 pixels left? And can we add a bit more to the skin? Can we have some light in here? And I remember like, there's like, well, dude, why don't you freaking do it yourself? Like, load it up. I'm like, yeah, why not just do this myself? I load it up, I'm like, move the light here. And I'm doing all my director notes, which means my artist can focus on doing the stuff that I absolutely cannot do, which is build big giant robots, rig amazing characters, build
specialization, like stuff that they
totally, but
that's their sweet spot.
That's the thing, because well, like, you know, when I was a VFX supervisor and a VFX producer, like back in my days, I remember like the thing that would take a lot of time is client feedback. Like, you know, you'll get feedback notes, and yeah, even things like moving a tree. You know, saying it aloud sounds like, how hard can that be? But for an artist to load up that scene, block it in the calendar to do it, move that tree, render out versions, upload it to like Shotgun, F-Track, or whatever you're using for reviews, or, you know, IO-Frame, and then get feedback. I mean, that's a day gone. Whereas now, those little minor changes, and I have to admit, like, you know, being a VFX suit, watching other amazing directors work, and you start to pick up certain things, and then when I became a director, I start to realize, like, oh my god, like, I have a million things I wish I could do to the shot. But, you know, if I wasn't hands-on, and I was just like a director, just like directs, and I wasn't hands-on, half of my ideas or the things that extra 10% to make that shot perfect, I wouldn't be able to do because it'll go over time, over schedule, or over budget, because it takes you know, you get an artist to do that. It's time and money, right? Whereas with something like Unreal Engine, the fact that I can do my own layout, I can block the shots out the way I want to, put like, you know, white box the level the way I want it, and really experiment with the camera, get my VCam rig in this room here, put an iPad, block it out, really find the cinematography language. Once I'm happy with that, block it, sign it off, it's in the edit, then my artist can just have fun making it look good, polishing up, adding characters, adding particles, the stuff that they love doing. They don't want to be dealing with little finite notes that the director has at like 1 a.m, right? And I think that's what's been a big game changer, and how filmmakers like myself and other people out there are doing some amazing work, able to do these amazing sequences so quick, and they look premium quality because of that level of, like, you know, hands-on, and you know, how easy it is to pick up.
For sure. And so, like, I guess that kind of leads into this next question as well, but I think we're pretty much past the point where it's like, some people are still asking questions like, so do you think virtual production is the future? It's like, what kind of stupid question is that? Like, we've already been working in it, so it's kind of, So kind of breaking that down to be a little more specific and a little more granular, where do you see, we've already touched on it a little bit, but where do you see virtual production kind of taking filmmakers, taking studios, and just artists in general? And then kind of follow that up with, where do you want it to be? Like, do those two paths line up, or is it just like, it's not quite going to be to the capacity that you hope, or, yeah, just what are your thoughts on that?
I think we're pretty much very close where we are now. The only thing that's holding us back is the thing that's always held any sort of visual medium or creative medium back, and that is technology, right? At the moment, GPUs is the thing that's allowing virtual production to happen. Yeah. I don't know if you saw the NVIDIA conferencing that came out a couple of days ago. I mean, the stuff they're doing with things like Omniverse and the cloud-based GPU rendering, and the fact that I have a sick GPU in my machine and I'm seeing stuff in real time and not having to sit there and wait for render passes to come out of V-Ray or something is already happening right now. I think how it's going to affect. I mean, look, we've talked about animation, but we haven't really talked about the hybrid of live action animation. Things with LED walls. Things like what Mandalorian are doing, and a lot of other shows are now doing. Last December, I directed something for a company called Rebellion, the video games company that also are producers of Dread, and they're in the 2001 IP. Amazing company to work with, and it was interesting working with them because they're a games developing company and publisher. So to them, they're like, this isn't new. We've been using game technology to do stuff for a long time. Yeah. What's this whole big thing about, gaming real time? That's what they've been doing for decades. But what was interesting, from the live action point of view, is the fact that we could have a photorealistic based rendered or real-time rendered location on the screen in the big LED wall in the volume. And we can move my camera around and it's synchronized. This isn't like front projection. This isn't like, it's a computer image on the screen. No, it's a living world on that screen and it's synchronized with our screen. And the way I describe it in the most layman term, when I say layman, this is proper dorky now, but I think of it like parallel universes, right? On one side you have the CG world, and on this side you have the live action world, and they're in synchronicity. And that's kind of that's the most nerdy multiverse way of doing it.
I like it. Yeah, it's a great explanation.
But really, I mean, when you look at the faces of the cinematographers who are not techie in the world of real-time rendering, but they're obviously very techie on cameras and cinematography, they are blown away the fact that they can pull focus and the environment behind is pulling focus. Yep. They can adjust lighting in the real environment and adjust the CG. It's mind-blowing. I remember we did a tech recce on this thing called Percival, which we shot at Rebellion last December. We spent the whole tech recce just geeking out, go, oh my god, we can move the exposure and it does it. Wait, what if we move the tree? Oh my god, this is... Yeah. What if we throw more stuff in the front and reflections? Let's put more reflections in. We don't have to hide this thing anymore. And it influences your storytelling. So as a director, my shot list completely changed. I had a shot list that I would usually go in when I do a shoot, and I'm like, as out the window, I'm going to generate a new shot list based on what I know can be done. Yeah. And, usually on live action shoots, you're the only technical person with visual effects you're dealing with is the VFX supervisor or the DIT guys, the DIT guys. This case, I'm running between, obviously, my production team, the cinematographer, first AD, and I'm running over to Digital Village, which is the virtual production team. And those guys are not just the guys behind the computers doing the magic. Those guys are instrumental to what happens on the screen. Those are the guys I'm like, listen, man, I want to have this shot. I'm going to bring a foreground object here. I also want to go all kind of handheld, pull Greengrass a bit. And they're like, okay, we need to recalibrate this, and we need to do a test, and we're going to move the light. And all of a sudden, you're jamming with all those people, which the funny thing is, Luke, it's the sort of jamming that usually happens in post-production, right? And now we're doing that on set. Which made you think from a producer point of view, now wearing my producer hat, I'm like, that means I have to offload my visual effects budget and schedule way up front. And it's something financiers and executives and producers are not accustomed to. They're like, that kind of messes with our way of making this film, because traditionally you post is post. And so, to answer your question, where I see film, I'm seeing the word post being very minimal. I think what usually is atypical of post-production, which is visual effects, is now being done as part of the production process. The minute you're writing the script, you're involving not just the DP and the production team, but you're also involving the virtual production team. And there's going to be new jobs coming out of that. You're going to need a first AD that is so fluent in the world of virtual production, because at the moment they're not. They're having to rely a lot on the VP supervisor, who do amazing work. But just like with the filmmaking industry, certain jobs will come up, certain positions will come up, and new tech will be coming up. The way you've pulled focus, maybe gaffers and focus pullers have to retrain. And that was the other thing we quickly realized, was the fact that, yes, technology influences the way films are made, but it also influences the employment side of things. Because I remember putting a post on this Facebook group to do with filmmaking, live action filmmaking, and obviously people were impressed, but also I got a lot of backlash. People were saying, well, there goes our jobs, the world of computers taking over our world. And I'm like, no guys, you're missing the point. We still need gaffers, we still need DPs, we need good art directors, we need production people, because you still need to build a set. It's not just a guy in front of a screen, otherwise it's not going to look that good. So those guys will have to just, level up a bit, skill up. And the cool thing is there's so much support. The government's giving support on training VP. There's so much more material on. I mean, there's a Facebook group dedicated to virtual production, by the way, which is like, I learned so much off that. And there's people actually sharing. And I think that's the other thing, kind of reminded me a little bit like when I started in visual effects, was that, when I tried to get into live action, when I was back in my day, it was a bit of a closed circuit. Like, you had to go to film school, or you had to like join as a runner on a production and work your way up. Whereas I find like with visual effects and virtual production being now one, I would say, the community is so open. There isn't like, oh, well, that's trade secret. It's like, no, this is what we're doing, and this is how we're doing. People are screen share recording their Unreal Engine setup, their blueprints. It's amazing. You're going to see so much. I think you're going to find a lot of artists, a lot of VFX artists that were, as I said, we're all hidden filmmakers, but the ones that were a bit afraid to make a film, I don't know if I can make a film, don't have to go to film school. You're going to find a lot of those VFX artists are now turning filmmakers, like, and doing amazing shots and kind of being a bit more free to share their, express their ideas, because you don't need a huge, massive team. They can just literally do it in their room on their spare time. Like we have spare time in visual effects, right? But, yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, there's been, I mean, obviously, like anytime a new tool comes out, a new technology, like I think there's always a group, and the group changes, like it's not always the same people or anything, but there's always like this initial fear of like, so I know that it's been a while since I've done it, but I did a live demo on our YouTube channel, live being real time. I think it was like 10 minutes where I rotoscoped 3 different shots, and it plays out in real time, but it's all cloud-based GPU rendering through this platform called Runway ML. And the response, you have these 2 groups of people, and one is like, hey, this is cool new technology, I can really see how this is gonna save a lot of like mundane work for me. And then you have this other group that's like, these are my jobs, like I'm a roto artist or whatever. And I think something that is really important to like clarify, as you mentioned, like it's shifting, and things have always been shifting. It's like, that's not new, but I think people would have this initial hesitation, like I'm not going to be able to be known for my skill set. And it creates this fear that I get it. I get that initial, like, this is threatening my livelihood. But I think if you take a second to kind of like process through, okay, what are some different things that I can learn? How can I kind of pivot from this? And even I don't even think that like the AI-based roto tools are at a point where like they're just completely removing feature work. Like that's going to be a while. So I think you have time to hop over into virtual production or anything. And as you said, skill up. Like I liked that terminology a lot, because I've got a friend, really good friend. He always says, if you feel like you're in over your head, like in a conversation, raise your head up.
Nice.
And so speaking to, hey, figure it out. It's like dig into whatever it is instead of just being like, well, this is too much. It's like, and I'm not a programmer. I'm not whatever. I can't do this. Like, no, like you have the ability to raise your head up, and you may have to put in the work to figure it out and, see what it is. It's not just going to be handed to you. But I think that is a really important component about just growing as an artist and being able to pivot and develop as technology and times change, because time moves forward and it's always going to be changing.
Exactly, man. Exactly. I mean, the whole skill up thing is very important, but also technology. Like, we're doing a lot of motion capture on our current animated film, and obviously doing traditionally Jap anime is usually hand drawn, in 2s, right? So we did our first sort of like test rendering sort of like early January this year, and we watched it and it was like, it's cool. Still doesn't feel like anime. It feels like CG that has cel shaded on. And, we looked at video games like Borderlands, which I love, and it's got this really comic book vibe to it, but it's still CG. And when we looked at it again, we're like, oh, it's the effects. The effects is what, really helps, brings it out. So, things like when the tears are dropping down, we have this big, massive, like, white line dropping down. You're like, oh, and the reflection being big, but also things like the blood spatters. And you start to realize, oh, we're going to have to use things like Adobe Animate. I've never used Adobe Animate, but oh my God, how much fun and easy it is to bring your footage in, animate in 2s, using a Wacom tablet, which I'm using anyway, and just do these like really cool, intricate lines, and you comp it on in DaVinci Resolve on top of the Unreal Engine renders. You're like, oh my God, it feels like an anime now. We have all those little things. And, look at movies like Spider-Verse, where they've done it so well, where they've got like the half tone, the lines, and the mixed media. And Spider-Verse is a good example where the industry is going creatively, because, imagine pitching a movie like Spider-Verse, like, I don't know, like 10, 15 years ago. like animation producers were like, no, that's not animation, that's a mashup, that's a mess, what is this? Now,
and that'll never work because the tech, I don't think it would have worked. It would have been like everything looks either the exact same and it's not different enough, or it's like you're pretty much just cutting to live action between live action and cartoons.
Exactly.
Like, I think that's the vibe anybody would have gotten. They did that so well.
No, for sure. But also with AI, you know, there's the roto element, which you've mentioned in detail, but also like there's motion capture. So let's say we're doing motion capture at the moment, and obviously motion capture is not like you just put on an Xsens suit, which Xsens are amazing. We're working with Xsens very closely, and you know, we're using their tech, their suit. We're, you know, there's an amazing virtual production artist we're working with called Gabriella, who, the funny thing, I met her on the virtual production group. She was a fan of Mutant Year Zero, and I'm a fan of all the demos that she's doing. I'm like, who is this girl? She's doing some amazing stuff. And we're like, hey, should we work together? Like, can we be friends? And all of a sudden we're working together. And now she's now my motion capture supervisor on my project, my virtual production artist.
That's awesome.
And it shows you the community.
I love our industry, man.
It's so cool. Like, because I've never had to go through the typical HR hiring process at my company. It's really like, I see someone's work on Instagram, like, this is dope. Like, who are you? We should figure out some out. And then maybe not now, maybe not next, maybe not this year, but at some point we end up working together. And that's the same with Gabriella. Like, she's doing all these, like, and this is a girl that has never worked in the industry, by the way. Like, you're going to hear a lot about her, by the way. But, you know, like, later on, she's releasing a lot of stuff later this year. But she was like a bartender, like, and then she just wanted to learn virtual production. And you know, during pandemic, she thought, why not? And she started doing these really cool tests with the motion capture. She invested in an Xsens motion capture suit and a really cool machine. And she's posting stuff online, like, not to say, hey, what I'm doing, just somewhere to store it, I guess. And people are like, who is this? This is amazing. Yeah, there's some really great tips in it. People like Matt Workman, who's like a legend. Yeah, a legend of virtual production. He's involved and he's like posting her stuff. So yeah, so she's now doing motion capture. But what's interesting is, like, as a filmmaker, I always want more. That's the typical thing about directors. You're just never happy with what you have. So I'm like, one night, this is like 2 a.m, I'm like, oh my god, this is one thing I forgot to tell Gabriella to do, like, in terms of, like, it's a simple thing of just picking up a cup or something, right? And she's already doing so much mocap. I don't want to tell her, oh, can you do a mocap picking up a cup? So I looked at this thing called Deep Motion. I don't know if you've seen Deep Motion. Deep Motion is an AI platform. It's free. And you just upload your iPhone footage. So you position your iPhone there and you got some space. And I wasn't wearing any tight lycra or anything like that, just my normal clothes, a baggy t-shirt as well. Moving around, you know, picking up the cut. And it just processes this FBX for you. And I bring it into Unreal. I'm like, now it's not perfect, but for something like a cup drinking,
picking up a cup,
that's all you need, right?
Yeah.
Now, obviously, for the elaborate stunt work and walk-in and stuff like that, you need proper mocap, like Xsens, because they do all of the processing. But it just shows you, you know, technology can be a solution sometimes that will help not only save you money, but also allows you to spend more time doing the stuff that you really want to do, as opposed to getting a mocap someone drinking. Yeah.
Yeah, that is extremely important. And it's so cool to see how, you know, like, these AI machine learning based tools are really just bringing, again, like, I see everything as a tool set. Like, I'm not married to specific software. Everything is software agnostic in that regard. Like, if I can do something better in program A than program B, then that's the best thing for it. And so it's all, like, very situational. I think people get married to, I am only in 3ds Max, or I'm only an After Effects artist, or whatever. And I think that, like, really puts blinders on, and you're missing a lot of foundational pieces for the creative process when it comes to limiting yourself in that way. So I think that's extremely important. But as these machine learning models become more advanced, but also connecting the dots between, like, this is a really highly technical thing, but here's a really difficult filmmaking, VFX, whatever solution that is needed. And as we start to bridge the gaps between those two, I think it's just gonna, be great.
It's a human element. That's the thing. Like, I always get this typical question asked to me, and like everyone's asked me this, like, oh, do you think, like, machine learning and AI is going to replace filmmaking? I'm like, and like you said, like, it's never going to replace it. It's going to assist us in making better choices, or help us with our crazy choices that we make as filmmakers. But there's one thing that AI hasn't caught up with, and I don't think it will catch up any sooner. You know, we're not talking like Skynet here or the Cylons or something, right? But like, it's a human instinct. You know, even when you're rotoscoping a shot, right? And you're doing your basic roto, and then there's something about you being a human person looking at where the hair flow, looking away, oh, you know, this line here, you know, if I just edge it a bit more and maybe do a slight blur on this line here, but keep this bit sharp, that makes sense to my eye as a human being, but emotionally as well, it makes sense. Whereas an AI will just take the line literally, goes, oh, that's an edge, I'm going to stick a line on that. And it isn't that smart yet to differentiate and have that emotional connection to the shot. And that's the thing. People forget visual effects artists are not just like technical people, especially roto. You know, I get a lot of people go, oh, you must be great, you're not doing any roto now. And I'm like, you know what? I'm freaking glad I started my career doing rotoscoping, because when I became a VFX supervisor, I remember like being on set, and I remember like, I'm not going to name this person, but this first AD was like, oh, don't worry, it'll be fine. You know, we'll fix it in post. I'm like, there's hair blowing on this girl's hair. There's a big fan. There's a big lighting stand in front of the green screen. Why don't someone just move it? They're like, don't worry, you can fix it in post, right? I'm like, it would take me a whole day minimum to remove that pole. It'll take you 10 seconds to do that. So Roto has been, you know, people laugh about, oh, Roto is like the minimal entry thing. Oh, I don't want to do Roto. Oh, that's lower level. Oh my God. I still rely on the knowledge of Roto today, even as a director when I'm framing shots up. I even do my own mats when I'm doing temp comps, because you're not going to bring a highly amazing compositor in just do some temps for you. Fuck no, I'm going to do that myself, right? Just to get the idea across in the edit. And then once you sold the idea to the studio, then you go and bring on the person to do it for real. So Roto is an incredibly important skill, and it's a very human skill. It's not technical. You need to understand the shot for starters. You understand what is the purpose of the shot. What is the camera language? You know, understand things like motion blur, which is a bit technical, obviously, but at the same time, understand, like, you know, it's a windy scene. So, of course, you can have you can cheat your rotor having it flappy. But then there's an emotional moment where you shouldn't blur your edges, because people are going to be focused on those eyes. So maybe look at doing a luma key. All of those stuff, I'm getting really techy now, but it's emotional, and that's an artist's decision to decide how much blur to put on that edge and how much focus to put on the eye. It isn't, AI can't do that. So that, I think that's, people got to remind themselves that when they're looking at new tools, I think.
Yeah, and when they can really translate of this tool, like even as roto artists, I think this should be a tool that assists them and frees them up for the creative process. As you said, like there's so much more that goes into it than here's this line. Right. But if that line could be automatically generated and then tweaked based on an artist's opinion, like I think that is the sweet spot between most effective, not harming the process because you're able to get a better end result, but not just wasting time either doing mundane stuff. So it's always like a weird balancing act, I think.
Time is the biggest commodity in whether it's visual effects but filmmaking. Like, you know, for me as a director, there's one thing I wish we had more of, and that's time. Yes, we're always going to need more money. That's always, it doesn't matter how much money we get for it. I wish we had more money for that shot. But time is something, like with the budget, you can sort of control it by just begging for more money or convince someone to give you more money, or the crew to work a little bit later if they can. But time is something, like you said, it's moving forward, man. Once you've used up those few minutes, you're not getting those minutes back. It's gone. So use them wisely. And I think technology that enables you to work faster means that you're utilizing your time to get to the spot that you want to be creatively and get your vision as close as you can.
Yeah. And then even outside of the creative process, I get super introspective when it's like, time, wait, oh my gosh. No, that's good. Really, really good stuff out of this for sure. Kind of as we close up a little bit, like I know you're working on a couple stuff. Obviously that project probably can't say too much about. But other than that, what are some things you kind of have coming down the pipeline? Maybe some things you can discuss.
Yeah, I mean, look, here's the cool thing, Luke, about being the co-owner of a company and being a producer as well as a director. It means that I have very minimal embargo, which is why I'm able to, within reason, I'm willing to share stuff on social media, and I find that really helps. Not only you build an audience, but people care about your project. So when it does get released, people will watch it. And that's how we did The Beyond. The Beyond, I didn't use typical film marketing like routes to get The Beyond out there. The interesting thing is I used the visual effects industry, the industry that my filmmaking skills came from. My film school was working in visual effects. So how, Cinefx did this, when, God rest their soul now because they're no longer there. But when Cinefx, I know it's sad. But with Cinefx, they printed like, a blog on it and an article, and it was, it's on the films to come out. And for me, that's kind of like, oh my God, I can die now, because I've been reading Cinefx ever since like I was in the industry, and to see your work. So that helped. And a lot of people read it, not just VFX people, but also industry people. And also going to FX Guide, CG Channel, all of those people. And I think you guys at one point did a story on my process of doing some of the visual effects on Beyond. So all of that helps. All of that helps. So constantly posting. So, to answer your question, yes, we're currently deep in production on a project called Rift. So Rift is a CG anime sci-fi action. The way to picture it is like The Raid meets Akira with a twist of Edge of Tomorrow. Right, so that's all I can say.
I'm in.
Yeah, I'm in. That's what we did to all the finances. Yeah, we're in. But yeah, to tell a bit more, it's really about this guy that keeps repeating time. Every time he breaks his little brother out, his little brother has these special abilities that could basically he can jump between different multiverses. And obviously, if the government get hold of that, they're going to utilize it and weaponize it. All those typical tropes you see in science fiction films. But the interesting thing about this is it's told from an 8-year-old boy's perspective as opposed to the hero's perspective. And because you're constantly repeating, the hyper violence nature of it is completely crazy because it's anime. So 3D World magazine I think comes out middle of July, I think, and they're going to have first frames, like exclusive first frames on the film. So, and obviously I'm going to show you guys some stuff as well after this so you can see what it's like. But so we're working on that. We're scheduled to finish the movie end of this year, considering we started in January. We're ramping up teams, so I'm going to be posting adverts for like Unreal Engine artists to come on board. Epic have been amazing, helping us, guiding us as well. We've had people like Asus, Realusion, all those people, just amazing tech supporters that would not be possible. People like Xsens and Manus would not be possible to make this movie on a very independent way. If we went the studio route, which is go to a bigger studio, then we probably, as a filmmaker, I probably wouldn't have that control. I wouldn't be able to have like 100 robots fighting and blasting people's heads off. They'd be like, we have to run that by the studio first, and that takes months. So, and the level of experimentation I can do when you're an independent filmmaker, find that style. Whereas if you're doing a studio, you got to nail that style before you go into the studio. So there's that. But also, our company, Has Film the Company, is now shifting more towards animation. So we've got several projects that we're now taking out for financiers and casting. And the interesting thing is, with live action, traditionally you just have your script. And you're just knocking at every studio. And you have maybe some storyboards. And if you've got more money, you can do a proof of concept. But traditionally, it's the script of live action, right? And you're like knocking everyone's door, hey, give me some money to make this. Or go to an actor and say, this is going to be great for your career. This is going to be amazing. I wrote this for you. All the typical thing you would say. Whereas we find with animation is we could just take a week off, do a little test sequence, attach that with the script. Not only do people see what the animation style is, because it's pretty much what it's going to be, but also emotionally you connect with people. They're like, because animation has this way of connecting with audiences in a way. But also you see the color palette, the style. It's so much easier. It's not easy, but it's easier than live action to get your project in front of people. And as we all know, animation is like, since last year, one of the things about the pandemic is it's made people wanting more diverse content. So a place like Crunchyroll, which was recently bought by Sony, their subscription rates have gone up. Now, people are subscribing to things like Crunchyroll and watching anime or animation, like Undone on Amazon or Love, Death and Robots on Netflix. People are accepting to that. They're like, I want different content now because I've spent a lot of time at home or I'm working from home and I want more variety. So animation has shot up massively. And for filmmakers like myself and other filmmakers that weren't really allowed to do animation. And I say that because I've been several years, I'll go to LA and I'll say, and they'll ask you, what else have you got? Well, I've got this live action. I've got this animated show. No, not interested in animation. No, costs too much money, need a big studio. Was now like, hey, let's talk about animation because we know how it can be done. They can use Unreal. We've seen the stuff you're doing. It opens the doors and it means that you have some of those ideas some of those scripts that were just not shootable are now possible to be done in animation because the things like whether it's Unity, whether it's Unreal Engine, whether you're using Xsense mocap or deep motion AI, or you're just doing hand drawn, which is still a beautiful art form, or a hybrid of all of them, which is kind of what we're doing with Rift, then there's a possibility of doing as much projects as you can. We're also looking at we looked at Unreal Engine 5 because who hasn't, looking at things like Nanite and Lumen, and again, even that's very, very early, it's not production ready for sure, but having access to technology this early means that you can plan for your next animated film if you want to go photoreal, and by the time Unreal Engine comes out, you're in the financing stage. So it really, really does help have an understanding of the technology while you're in development, especially if you're making high concept science fiction world building films like we do.
Yeah, man, so much good stuff there. I'm like, yes, I don't get to nerd out on this level, specifically with like Unreal Engine, virtual production, any kind of that stuff, as much as I want. Right. Usually I get laughed out of the room because people are like, who is this guy? Get him out of here.
Who is this witch?
Cool. Yes. So very kindred spirits in that regard. Has yeah, like thank you so much for carving out some
Pleasure.
time to chat with us. Really fun episode, fun chat. Where can people find out more about you, more about the projects that you have coming
For
up?
sure. Like I said earlier in when I was talking, the fact that I'm very open on social media, so you can find me on Instagram. The details will come up probably after this podcast. But things like HaZ Dazzle, I didn't come up with the name. That's a whole different podcast for that name reason. But you can find me on HAZ Dazzle. I'm on Twitter as HAZ_Dulull. I am on Facebook as Has Film. You can go to my website, hasfilm.com, which has got all the links. But yeah, reach out, man. Put a comment. I'm very approachable. Like I said, we're going to be ramping up hiring artists. So if there's people listening that want to get their hands into Unreal, and the way I hire also is I don't really just hire that you need to know the tool. For me, it's if you got a really good sensibility of storytelling, the way you light your shots, but you're not very savvy technically of Unreal, that stuff is fine. We can show you that stuff. It's a skill set. I'm hiring artists, not robots. So please,
like
and tons behind the scenes. So definitely follow all my social media stuff. I'm going to be posting stuff every week. But yeah, and thank you so much, Luke, for talking to me. It's really nice to be able to talk to kindred spirit. You're right. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. So thank you so much for this episode of Ask an Artist. Hasraf HaZ Dulull. It's been super awesome, and we'll have to do it again.
My pleasure, man. Thank you.